Yo, what's up guys? Welcome to the new YouTube channel and welcome to Hood River. My name is Rago and today we're going to break down wind directions, what you need to know and how you can use it to your advantage. And before we dive into it, this is a new YouTube channel, so if you do find this video helpful, please hit the subscribe button, give it a like, hit the bell icon so you get notifications, and share it on social media with a friend. The goal is to get to 500 subscribers this month, and I don't know if it's obtainable, but maybe we can do it together. So with all that said, let's dive into the video. All right, so there are 5 wind directions that you need to know, and that is side shore, side onshore, side offshore, offshore, and onshore. And one thing to note is that these can change depending on the shape of the coast. So, for example, when looking at the map, a side shore wind could become a side offshore or an offshore wind, and then as well, something that you could use to your advantage, say you were riding at a bay, you might start off somewhere where the wind is blowing offshore, but then it becomes side shore and eventually becomes onshore again. And this is really ideal for new riders because if you drop your kite or you get in trouble, you're just gonna drift right back into the shore. So let's start with side shore and side onshore winds. So these are the safest and easiest winds for beginners. Again, like I mentioned, if you drop your kite or your wing, you're just going to slowly drift back to shore. And these also tend to be the smoothest winds to ride in. So moving on to offshore or side offshore winds, there's a lot of things to consider here, and in general, the best advice is avoid going out in these conditions. Now, offshore winds, these can be the most dangerous. So depending on other factors, they could be the best or the worst conditions. So for example, they might be the worst if you're on the ocean and the wind is just blowing out to sea. These are going to be likely turbulent winds, and then obviously, if you drop your kite, you're going to drift out to sea. Now, they can be amazing. So for example, if you're on a lagoon where there's land just downwind of you with no obstacles on it, then it might make for some pretty amazing freestyle conditions. And we do, for example, ride on a river where the water is shallow. It's about waist deep for about 50 feet out. So a spot like that as well, as long as you can stand and walk out of the water, this can be a good direction. But in general, offshore winds should be avoided by beginner riders for so many factors regarding safety, and as well, those spots tend to be quite crowded, so it might be a bit dangerous as well if you're trying to learn and then you're dropping your kite in an overly crowded area that might be highly sought after by other kiteboarders or wing surfers. So side off and offshore conditions can be pretty dangerous for new riders, but there is a time and a place for it. So for example, advanced kite surfers will go out on a side off direction for the waves, and that tends to be ideal. But if you're new, you should avoid that unless you have a rescue boat or a jet ski or some kind of rescue plan to get back in. Now onshore winds, these can be really good or really bad depending on a few factors. So one thing to consider is obstacles upwind and downwind can create turbulent or rotary winds. So for example, if the wind is traveling over land and say there's a building, it's going to need 7 times the distance, the height of that building, before the wind cleans up. And then I forget what the downwind one is. I think it's 3 times the distance to come back up for the wind to be clean. But prime example is in my home spot on a north wind, the wind is traveling over the land. So when it gets to us, even though the wind is side shore, it's very turbulent and rough because it's traveling over the trees, the buildings, and whatnot. And then up north, on a south, we have a massive sand dune. So likewise, when the wind is hitting that sand dune downwind, it creates the same rotary winds. But back to my point on onshore winds, what happens if there is obstacles on the land, this is going to create that turbulent rotary winds, and as well, kind of depends on the current. So you are getting pushed towards the shore, so if you can't stay upwind, obviously it's going to be harder for you to get upwind, But then if you're dealing with those gusty conditions, maybe the current is pushing you towards the shore at a speed of 5 knots. So that 20 knot wind you're riding in is now more like 15 knots actually. But if there's nothing on the land, say you were riding somewhere like in the desert and it was onshore and it was just coming off from the ocean onto the desert, well, now you're gonna get really smooth wind. So it really just is situational here. Now temperature can play a role as well, and these things can kind of compound and interact to your advantage or disadvantage. So if you're riding somewhere and it's already, say, a turbulent gusty wind, but that wind happens to be cold, well, cold air, it's more dense, so those gusts are going to be more impactful and you're really going to feel it while you're riding. And then likewise, if you were somewhere with a smooth, warm wind traveling over just water, no turbulence, no interactions, well, now that the gusts are going to be basically not noticeable at all. I mean, it's going to be super smooth and consistent, so all these variables play together. But cold wind, you know, it can also be used to your advantage. So a lot of big air riders, they love what's called the elevator effect. So they'll actually seek out that really strong punchy wind, and when they go to send a jump, they go up a little bit more, maybe they go up again. So depending on what kind of riding you're looking for, that might be something to consider. If you're new, you kind of want to chase the smoother, easier winds regardless of your wind sport, and then when you're more advanced, you can start seeking out the heavier winds, maybe even the colder or the gustier winds if you're looking for the big air or just getting really intense. And another interesting thing is like thermal winds. So for example, where I used to teach, we had a big sandy beach that would heat up throughout the day. So even though there was no wind in the forecast, all the air out in the above the cold water there would come rushing in onto the beach as the I think what happens is the warm air rises on the beach and then that cold air rushes in and it creates a breeze. So that's kind of a cool thing you can pay attention to. And even if it's not forecasted, if it's a big sandy beach, you might get a thermal wind. So these are just some things to consider, and when you're scouting out a riding spot, check out the map, get an idea of what the coast is doing, where's the wind traveling, is it going over obstacles, is it going to hit obstacles downwind of you, what's the direction, and what are the temperatures that you're dealing with. And once you understand these variables, you can start making more educated decisions on where you're gonna ride, when you're gonna ride, and maybe even what kind of discipline or sport you're gonna do. So if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and I will catch you later.